we go.
You're listening to Cooper Talk.
Welcome to Cooper Talk. I'm your host, Steve Cooper, and remember, I'm only as hip as my guest. I gotta tell you something, people. The gentleman on my show today, in a previous life, he was in the band called The Replacements, but now he's had 6 solo albums, and one's coming out on vinyl, and he's an artist. And I was looking at his work today, and I always, tried to draw when I was a kid, and I drawed as an adult, but I could never get the female mouth down right. It always looked stupid. It looked like Betty Boop. And his mouth and his eyes are just amazing. And he has a great book, which I looked through, and it's some great work. It's called 742, The Art of Chris Mars. And he was at the 1991 Game 7 of the Minnesota Twins when they beat the Atlanta Braves. At least that's what it said in his biography. And it's Chris Mars. How you doing, Chris?
Hi, how you doing, Steve? Nice to meet you.
So,
good to be on.
Are you a big baseball fan? Or I just saw that at the end of your bio, and I was like, it was a random thing.
Yeah, me and my wife, we've been going to games since we've been married. She kind of rekindled my interest in it. I grew up watching with my dad, the Twins. He was a huge fan. They finally won the World Series in '87, actually, and then he passed away just after that right after Christmas. So he finally got to see him win, and he'd been just a lifer. So I was a really nice thing to share with him. But so, yeah, we saw them win in '87, but then me and my wife were actually at the '91 game. So we were at Game 7, sitting up in the nosebleeds, and, man, it was unbelievable. It's just if you're lucky, once in a lifetime experience to be at a Game 7. Wow. Yeah, it was something.
So I want to start with your book.
Yep.
742, The Art of Chris Mars. First of all, 7:42 p.m. Explain that. Explain the title.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like it's where I live in Minnesota. It's the time of sunset on the fall equinox, and so it's kind of like it's the autumn, that sort of autumn light that's coming in that I like to sort of try to capture in my work. I like that kind of lighting, and as sun is setting. But so that it's basically that's when sunset is on the equinox in Minnesota. So I decided to name it that.
Okay, so
we had another name actually, and then a Disney movie came out. So
what was the other name? What was the name?
I can't even remember it because I wanted to forget it after. So I said, all right, got to come up with a new name. And then we were thinking about the light and the kind of lighting that I use, and then it kind of connected into that to 7:42 p.m. So.
Well, it's quite obvious, through your career, you're a very artistic guy. I watched Theory of Facts the other day, your short movie, and when you go to your website, there's so many different, the animation, the videos. But for you, as a kid, did art come first, or did music come first, or was it simultaneously?
Very naturally, art came first. I was the kid who could lampoon things in grade school, get my friends to laugh. I was always drawing constantly, so I wasn't getting any work done. In whatever class I was in, I'd have the book open, but I'd set it on the desk in such a way where it would hide me doodling. And I probably ruined a lot of desktops too with like pen. I don't know if you could say ruined. Maybe there were something. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah. So just one of those things that was ingrained in me from as early as I can remember. I was always drawn to visual things from probably before I could talk. I remember we had this Encyclopedia Britannica. It was like a 1960 version of that Encyclopedia Britannica, and I remember and I was born in '61, so in my early years, I would thumb open to the painting area where they had the classic paintings, and I just remember from a very early age. Yeah. So yeah, long story short, yes, visual art came first.
Now, was your family, I know you said your dad was a big Twins fan, but did they encourage it? Like for me, I still remember I took an art class and I drew this teddy bear, and it was in an orange mat. Remember those mats, the little mats on the outside, like the frame? And it was
Sure.
like a summer class that we could go to when we were little. And I still remember that. My parents always encouraged me to draw and stuff like that, even though I would try to draw cartoons and put them on the kitchen table and stuff like that. But were your parents encouraging of your art? Because a lot of parents aren't.
My mom particularly was. And then as I got a little older and maybe a little bit better, my dad also became encouraging. They were, they were just. I came from just a very. My dad was a housemate. He painted houses, and not the kind of painting houses in the mob, So he actually just painted houses. That was what he did for a living. And my mom just like a stay-at-home mom. 6 siblings and me, so 7 kids, and it was encouraged. I remember my dad and my mom always interested in music, and they'd kind of sing around, kind of humming while they're working or whatever. My mom loved to watch kind of musical acts on TV, and they'd talk about bands that they liked. They were kind of older, definitely from a couple generations removed. My dad was born in 1909, so he had some crazy stories of Minneapolis and just growing up in that time in the country and stuff. So that was really interesting. My mom was a little bit younger, about 12 years younger than him. So, but yeah, they were both interested in art in the kind of however they could absorb it. So through music, through movies, and television. My mom loved Alfred Hitchcock. I remember from the tiniest, when I was the youngest kid or youngest age, I would be on her lap and she would never miss an episode of Alfred Hitchcock. So very early memories. So, but they were encouraging. Yes, they were encouraging. So I was lucky.
What were you, when you were young, because I know later, with your brother's schizophrenia, that's why you directed some of your paintings now. Yeah. But when you were little and you were artistic, was there certain things, like you said you doodle? Were you doodling like cartoons, or were you doodling you said you looked in art books? I mean, were you doing Cezanne? I mean, what were you doing at that age? Because you're young and you said you got better, but what was your focus? What did you want to draw?
Well, maybe I was trying to impress at that time. I was probably maybe trying to get my technical skills down, so as maybe an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old, I would watch Bonanza with my dad. And so I liked Dan Walker. I like Hoss, that was kind of one of the characters I liked. So I draw Hoss, or I draw, a lot of times it's just figures, Frank Cannon. Remember that show Cannon back in the 70s? And, stuff like that. And then my dad really enjoyed, I think he really liked Westerns. And I think part of it was because it gave him memories of his youth. He grew up in Minneapolis when there were horses and blacksmiths. And so he really loved horses. So I would try to draw a horse every once in a while. And so it was probably more about trying to get technical things down. But then also I was very interested in monster movies, like a lot of the Boris Karloff, The Creature from the Black Lagoon. And, I'd share that with my friends. And later on, I realized, what a connection those kind of outsiders, those quote monsters, what role that would play in my life when it came to sort of my brother's outcast status, as being schizophrenic. So, it all kind of blends together. But so probably from my imagination, I would started to draw more when I was a teenager. Then I started thinking about things that were inside a little more and trying to, make something that was my own and not trying to copy. So, but I had some pretty decent skills, I think, by then.
Now, when did music come into play? Because I know on your solo albums you play all the instruments, but with the Replacements you were the drummer. And my brother played drums, my sister played the cello and the French horn. Weird combination. Yeah. I couldn't play shit. I sucked at all of it, but I couldn't. I was awful. But when did music come into your life? Because it's funny, as I said earlier, with your movies and stuff like that. It seems like art has really commanded your life in some way or another, whether it's music or the paintings. But when did you get that music bug, and what were some influences you had that pushed you into that?
Wow. So I'd have to say older siblings and them being interested in music, lots of radio on constantly, probably just whatever the top 40 was at the time. And one of my earliest memories was Downtown by Petula Clark. I was just a very little kid and being in the kitchen before, I don't even think I was in school at that point. I was so little. So, but I remember just the atmosphere in our house and everybody was interested in music. So, my brothers would bring home, my brother was into The Who, and another brother, really liked David Bowie. So I would get these, Led Zeppelin was in there. So a lot of the stuff and then I remember at one point, so basically the radio, my siblings playing records and being exposed to it that way. The Beatles, of course, were just that was like the prime time for them, from 60 to 70 roughly, so they were on the radio. So, and I to this day, I can hear a Beatles song and be brought back, to that time. So, or so many songs on the radio, but it was a great time for music. The 60s into the 70s was just a incredibly, so many great things came out of that period, I think.
So when do you gravitate to actually being a musician? I mean, we all listen. I mean, for me, I was born in '63, towards the end of '63, and I know I went through the same stuff for the movies. My first album was A Partridge Family and a Tom Jones Greatest Hits, which are like so random, but it was a great time. And then as we got into the '80s, it was a great time too. But what gravitated you? Because like me, I wanted to play guitar, I couldn't. I mean, what made you pick up an instrument? And what was that first instrument? Was it the drums?
Well, it was something. I couldn't afford anything. I couldn't get an electric guitar or an amp. I guess if I really worked, but my mom would give me some pots and pans to hit, and so I actually set up a couple, sort of a little thing in the nailed some things to like the wooden side of the stair, and I'd be like banging on that stuff. And then I remember there was my parents saw that, hey, I'm kind of musical and I like to hit things, so they surprised me with one of those Sears drum sets, when I was probably 10, and just made out of plastic. So I think because that was my first instrument, I went there, and it was very immediate. I didn't need any electricity or anything. All I needed was some sticks and a chair or a throne, and you sit and you start hitting it. So that's what got me into it. And then, I think I did. There was another influence would be a band down the block. There was a family called the Churchills. That was their last name, Churchill, and they were able to. Their dad or their parents allowed. There was one of those bands that were allowed to play in the basement, and they were playing Indagata Davida. And I remember a kid. They just start rumbling the neighborhood. All the kids would run over to the house. And then we could look into their basement windows. So there'd be kids just piled at the basement windows, and I was one of those kids. And when the first time I did that, the window was open and the sound was coming out, all through the neighborhood, and the drums were right below that window. So I was like right over the drum set, and then I think that inspired me to want just that sound of real drums and what that sounded like. And then pretty much every time the cops would come, after about, 45 minutes, shut it down. So we'd always get over there really quick to hear some stuff before the cops came.
So as you started getting to your teen years, were you forming garage bands? And then I want to find out what, I know there was a legendary music place in Minnesota. There's a documentary on it. I think Longhorn. I can't think of the name. There's something.
Yeah, Longhorn was an early. Yeah,
but
one of the
what,
early.
like when you were getting older, when you were started to form bands with your friends, what music did you want to play? Because, once again, we had the 70s, we had the 60s, then the 80s start coming. But, I mean, what was your focus? When you were sitting there, when you could have thought, okay, I want to encompass me and my friends, when you're a 15-year-old, and you put a band together, what kind of music did you want to play?
At that point, it would have probably been, the big things that kids were listening to, Aerosmith, Ted Nugent. This was pre-punk, so, the Who, of course, I was a Who fan. And so that would probably be the kind of music that permeated what me and my friends at around age 15 or 16 were listening to. But then right around that time too, probably 16, 17 years old, the Sex Pistols, were on the cover of a magazine, and I was bagging groceries. And I just thought, what the hell is this? This is a whole nother world that didn't seem like anything that I'd really, thought of or been part of or heard before. So then I went home and I asked my older brother, who was he had a Rolling Stone subscription, so he knew about all this stuff. And I asked, have you heard of this band? And he had the record. He already bought it. So he had just gotten it, never mind the Bullocks. And so I remember putting that on, and that was a gateway into the sounded like something. I guess prior to that, the musicianship and the pedestal that rock stars were on seemed unreachable. And when punk came along, it seemed like so immediate, in that it was kind of sloppy and crude, and the attitude and the sound of it, that like, that's kind of how I feel at a teenager. So it's all of the emotions are there, but then also just the simplicity of the sound made me think that, hey, I could do this, or I could be part of something. So I think that's, and I think, when I talked to a lot of other people that kind of got into it at that time, that was a lot of the same sentiment, where it felt like something you could be part of rather than just be a spectator.
See, it's funny, the punk scene. I want to find out what the punk scene in Minneapolis was, because I know in Philly, I grew up 10 minutes from Philadelphia. On South Street, there was a store called Zipperhead, and it sold all the punk stuff. And that was stuff we hadn't seen, and all the punks would go down to South Street. And it was different, because I grew up in the suburbs. I looked like one of those dicks in the 80s movie. I mean, I had hair and all that, but it was funny. Sure. But there was a burgeoning punk scene. When you were sitting there getting into punk, was there a punk scene where you could go see bands, or was it something you had to listen to the Sex Pistols, you had to find an album? I mean, what was your outlet to get introduced to it?
Well, yeah, and then as I got of being able to go to a bar age, a couple years later, first, I was exposed to some punk, but I didn't get there. And the guys I was with at the time, Bob Stinson, who was a former, obviously part of the Replacements, and his brother Tommy, and there were some other guys though, but we weren't playing punk really at that point. We were still playing, like Radar Love, stuff like that, maybe some Leonard Skinner, things like that. So, but you could feel that things were changing. The radio started playing new wave a little bit, and bands that were sounding different, like the drums were kind of out front more, and then Elvis Costello comes along, and the Police, and I just remember how out front the drums were on those Police records. And but so just the new wave scene and the punk scene. But I think once I wanted, definitely artistically or whatever, creatively, I wanted to move that direction. And then I remember Bob Stinson discovered the Damned, and so that was kind of his one that he latched onto. So we all kind of had our influences there. And then I think Paul came along, and he introduced us to the New York Dolls, and so like it all started to swirl around in this punk world. And then we were at an age then we could start going out to see. And then the Jay's Longhorn was the bar down Minneapolis that had all of the punk bands come through. So anybody and everybody that was in the scene, Blondie, all of the new bands started coming through in those kind of later 70s years. And so, we'd start to see them live, and then there were a couple of local bands that were kind of the Suicide Commandos, and the Suburbs were another band. They were a little bit more new wave, and so you could feel things changing pretty rapidly.
Well, it's funny when you talk about the new wave bands, because I just Clem Burke's been on the show before, and I just saw them play in Philly like 2 years ago. He's an amazing drummer. Some of those guys in those new wave bands, Stuart Copeland, were all just great drummers. Did you look at them and did you aspire to do that? Like as a young musician, were you saying, man, these guys have chops? Because they've been doing it longer, but was that something did you practice a lot? Did you really aspire to be a badass drummer? Because as you said, punk, you didn't have to be some of the punk, and you just boom, boom, boom,
yeah,
boom.
Yeah. But like you said, the skills were there. It was just playing it a little differently, a little different way. But if I think about the drummers that I aspired to be prior to punk, it would have to be John Bonham and Keith Moon. Those were the two I like unreachable places that I'll never get, but very inspiring. But yeah, punk comes along, and then you have the drummer for the Sex Pistols. You have Stuart Copeland, and like you said, Clem Burke, and all of these drummers that were, again, the mixes, they were so out front. It was very sort of drum forward music as well. Of course, the Ramones, the simplicity of the Ramones, but the two drummers I think that inspired me the most, because I would appreciate all of the drumming and all of the skills, but I didn't necessarily want to play like this person or like that person. But there were two drummers, Topper Headon of the Clash, and I always forget his name, but he's the drummer of Elvis Costello. I wore those records out. He was very dynamic in his fills, and I learned a lot of just like stuttered little things from him and from Topper Heaton. So those were the two guys that influenced me, I think, the most.
Now,
I don't know why I went to those two, but there was something that those two guys were doing within the songs that I felt like it wasn't overboard, but it was just enough to kind of accent things in a real cool way. And so that's kind of the direction I started to move.
now as you're playing the drums more, are you still painting, or have you put that on the back burner? Because it's a lot to do. Because I mean, I always say I have some friends who are very good drummers, and drummers, they always get the bad rap, like because of Spinal Tap. They always get that bad rap. But drummers, you find most drummers. First of all, you have to use both. You ever try to do this with your hands and your feet, and it's almost impossible. And every drummer I meet has like a side hustle because they all this entrepreneurial mind. It's something, I think it's a creativity. But for you, I mean, were you still painting when you were drumming, and as your career started getting bigger, or were you just like, I'm concentrating on music? Because it had to be tough.
Well, I was drawing all through my childhood, just like I can't help it. I see a pen and a paper, and I just start wanting to doodle. So, or I'm on the phone and I'm making pictures, while I'm talking. So it's just kind of a nervous habit in the background. But I think that when music came along and the immediacy of punk and thinking that this was another creative outlet that I could actually participate in, and then being a teenager and having that kind of energy and nervous energy and not being able to sit still as much at that point, this was a great outlet. So, because I was getting into trouble too, with the friends, the company I kept, so to speak. So there was a little, I got into some teenage city type trouble, but it was a great outlet, punk, and getting in with a group of anybody at the time that I could think of. I sort of just wanted to explore that, and it was a creative avenue, and it was very immediate. And so I let sort of the visual part of me probably subside for a while, although I was still picking it up from time to time during that time, but not as much. And I just kind of I guess I'm the kind of guy too, even today, where I can only really do one thing at a time. If I want to focus on something, I have to devote the attention. Maybe it's that hunter-gatherer type of personality where my wife, she can do a zillion things at a time, and I can say, I gotta go for the hunt now because I need to eat or something. So I gotta just focus on that, getting that critter or whatever. So that's how I'm geared. So yeah, I think it was one of those things where I couldn't really split my attention as much, and I thought, well, now I'm doing this. Now I got to really go do this, and then I did whatever I could to improve and push it. And I think we were all in that. I think it was for all of us. It was a way out. It was a way off. It was a way out of the factories. It was just something that gave us some creativity, some hope to do something with our lives. So I think we pushed pretty hard, knowing that. That if we don't do this, what are we going to do?
Now, when you left the band, you guys had attained success, and of course, you've done so much more since then. But what is your mind frame? You're a young guy then still, and you've established some success. You guys were legendary status, but now you're starting on your own. What did you want to do right away? Did you want to do a solo album, or did you want to just concentrate on painting? What was going through your mind? Because once again, you achieved a lot that people will never achieve. I know a lot of actors who they've been on TV shows and they're bummed because their pilot got canceled. I'm like, dude, you're on a TV show for 4 years. So what is it? You're a young guy. You're coming off. You guys were legendary status. What is your focus then? Because it's almost like you're starting over because you were with them for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a solid 10 years with the Mats, and it was one of those situations where it was very intense. And like I said, we pushed and we did as much as we sort of earthly could within our abilities to kind of. But at the same time, it was also part of who we were was. There was a lot of alcoholism. There were drugs came into it. So I would say that, when you're bright-eyed and you want to get into it at first, when you're starting out, the dream is there and you're all focused. And we pushed up until about the middle of the 80s, probably mid-career. was when it was the most fun from the beginning up until that time. And then, we started to get the feeling that we were maybe, worried about repeating, or where is this going? And people's attitudes start to change. More alcoholism comes into it. And then it starts to fall apart. And then you start to feel the opposite of the dream. You start to feel the deterioration. And then, of course, that's kind of a, sort of a progressive thing until it ends. And it's the story for so many bands, in so many situations. It doesn't have to be music, it could be anything else. Anything where people are very intensely involved and they follow the dream, they go for the dream, and then it starts to fall apart. And then there's some bands that can hang on to that and navigate that personality-wise and attitude-wise, and they're just on a different plane or whatever, and they can take it to just these soaring heights, But we did what we could do. I think that was it. But so the mentality at the time I left the band was like, there was so much fun, but there was also a lot of crap. And I was glad to be done with it. So it was a very intense 10 years that I was like, oh man, all I want to do is just go to the country or go into my room and shut the door. I don't ever want to tour again. I don't want to face another crowd. But there was also the other thing where the most fun I had, I think one of the most fun aspects of being in the Replacements was recording, was coming up with songs, the creative aspect of it. So when things were coming together creatively and we were in the studio, that was just like, oh man, I love that, because the mystery was there. You didn't know if a song was going to work or it wasn't. It was always just so damn fun creatively. And so I still had that in me. So when the band left, I had a lot of songs that I was starting to write on my own. And I remember, sort of presenting them. And I think Tommy was doing the same thing. Maybe Bob even Bob had left a little earlier than that. But me and Tommy had some things. But the door wasn't really open. The die was sort of cast in the roles that we played in the band. So, and I understand that in retrospect, that's cool. But the thing is I did have some more musical things to get out of me. And then I just sort of started sending demo tapes because I had these songs. And out of my wildest, I never thought that I would get signed on my own stuff. So I actually, got signed to Polygram, and it was just a strange thing. But I think, again, I was so burned out by the other aspects of the music business and the traveling that I really just wanted to kind of, I'll do these records and I'll do the best I can, because I want to devote, and focus and do that one thing at a time. And I kind of exercised that out of my system. And then I just really, suddenly all of the visual art things that I had sort of pushed back just started spilling forward. And I just had these visions, and I just wanted to get them out, and I just wanted to be alone. And that's kind of the transition. That was the mindset at the time.
Now, when you were doing your solo, though, when did you learn to play all the instruments? Because you were a drummer. Like, it's all of a sudden, because I've read, you played all the instruments, and you sang, and, you do all this stuff. But was that an easy task to learn? Well, I mean, is that something? I'm not a musician. So if you can play the drums, and you're in a band and you see someone playing the bass or the guitar, is it something that your mind is wired where you can see that and pick it up easy? I mean, you had to have been doing something right to get signed to Polygram, so it wasn't like you're just throwing crap against the wall. But so when did you start learning the instruments?
Yeah, I think it was part of, maybe as, we were all very creative guys, Paul, Tommy, me, Bob, we had a lot. I think maybe that's why our personalities, when we came together, it was more than, the band was more than the sum of its parts. We were individually, driven, and then as time went on, you learn, and then you also creatively you start to get hungry. I started to get hungry to want to do something beyond drums. And so in between tours, I would pick up a guitar and I started strumming, and then I started putting some chords together, and then, so then you start to get inspired in a completely different way. And maybe that's the progression that starts to create the fractures too in a band, where people, again, the roles are kind of cast, from the beginning, and you can't really change it. It's hard to change that. And I understand that, but meanwhile, we're all reaching for something else creatively because we're hungry. And then probably watching things happen in the studio where, Paul's doing his guitar part or Tommy's doing this, and and then I know that I can play a little bit of guitar, but I can't really contribute because that's not where that's not my. I think one time on Pleased to Meet Me, I was able to do a little guitar part, where I just did a little. I was like, wow, that was fucking fun. So I was very hungry. So I think that hunger is what propelled me to just think like, hey, maybe I could do a record. And again, it was like, for me, is to even think that I was so. When I got signed to a label off of these demo tapes that I did in the basement, I did not feel worthy at all that I should be able to go into a studio and record a record. I was just scared out of my mind. I'd never sung before, really, maybe a little backup. And I just went in and I just started playing, and one thing leads to another. And it was just me and the guy and an engineer and then the producer at the time, 3 people. And I just started hearing things, and I just wanted to layer things up. And again, I think it was just because I was kind of constipated, and I really wanted to have an enema in the studio. So
now, I want to talk to you because the average album's coming out on vinyl, August 27th. And as I said, I listened to it, and there's a lot of different genres on that. And I don't know if you did that subconsciously. I don't know, because, I think, as you said, when you grew up. But, I mean, there's some stuff that sounds like the early British, like Who or Beatles. And then you have 3 instrumentals. And, the punk prog, it just kicks ass. But it was like, when this album, you didn't have an album for this since like 2017.
Yeah, I think so. Yep.
So what made you decide to do the album, and was it easy getting back in the studio because you have been concentrating more on your art? So I think then you're a successful artist who has shows and things like that, and your book is great. But was it easier when you sat there and said, okay, this is my second wheel, like the painting is what you're really into? I mean, what was it like going in and recording this? Did the writing come easily?
So the way it happens with me, when I was learning painting, all I could do was I felt like I had to hang on to the tiger's tail, because if I let it go, I was going to lose it, because I was learning and I didn't want to lose it, and I didn't want to go away from it. So I just immersed myself into painting, and all I could do was that. I couldn't really do anything else, and I didn't want to do anything else until it all became second nature as a technique. And there's always these things with music or whatever you do. There's technical aspects to it, and then if you can get past the technical aspects and have that become second nature, then you can start to work on your vision, and you're not thinking about the technicalities. So I did that to the hilt with painting, and went till I got to the point where I could leave it for a couple weeks or a month, and then go back to it and remember, and just jump right back in. So I honed that ability, and what that allowed me to do was open up other things like filmmaking, and then I started to think about music again. And then the technology that we have, that advanced, it kept advancing. This record, the average album was done on just a little computer, with amp models. And then I did do drumming, but they were all triggered samples. So it's something where I can sit down and I can just do it on my own. And so that the technology allows me to jump back and forth between these things. The same with animation. The tools that are out there now, I can get in there, I can create something relatively quick, and then I can let it go, and I can do something else. So I was just reading the other day about creativity, and somebody talking about where it's really a healthy thing creatively to jump from like a different part of your brain does something else for a while, and then you come back to maybe your main thing, and you come back to it with a different perspective. So, and I'm finding that with jumping around, and I'm able to jump around now because I'm less scared of not being able to do it. And I do think so. What you were talking about with having music be kind of a more of a back burner thing, that I'm not making my bread and butter. It's just fun. It's just fun to do, and I have the tools to do it. So, God, it's just, why not? Let's just have some fun. I don't really care if anybody hears it or not. I want to do it because it's fun. And then also in that exercise of, that's one part of my brain, and it's healthy. And now I can go back to painting, my main thing, and it just, everything accentuates. I think one thing accentuates another.
Now, do lyrics come easy to you? Because, I would think another thing. I mean, I have a background in stand-up comedy. I can write a joke. I can sit down and write a joke like that, and people go, "Hey, some people are like, why don't you ever do your stuff on stage that you put on Facebook?" I go, because they're stupid throwaway jokes. They're fun. Like you said, it's fun.
Yes.
It's not my main gig. It was years ago, so it's fun.
Yes.
But me, I hear lyrics, and there's so many misconceptions. Like when you're younger, you thought every lyric, like you heard Don McLean, American Pie, and you thought every fucking word had the rhyme,
right?
Like everything. But now it's different. So when you sit down to write the lyric, what comes first for you? The music, like on the average album, was it the music or the lyrics, or do you flip it up?
I kind of flip it up, but I think more often than not, it is the music that comes first. And I remember there was just kind of reading about other people and how they do things. I think David Bowie and Keith Richards. I think Keith Richards, when he did, some of the, I don't know who wrote all the lyrics for the Rolling Stones or whatever, but I remember a lot of times they'd say it's just sonically something that fits. And you can think of a syllable that fits a part of a hook. And then that can, it might not even make any sense, but then that can trigger something. So a lot of times the music can trigger a lyric, and I think that happens more often than not. But then with this record, I think there was a lot of stuff, lyrically that I just wanted to say, and the idea behind it is, I think in society right now, what we're dealing with is a lot of extremes, and the center and the average is being kind of silenced, and the extreme voices and the loud voices are out front more right now. That's the way it feels to me in society and in what's happening in the world. And so the average album, this is just coming back to like trying to come back to the center. And that's kind of, that's sort of that was what I wanted to say, I think, for the most part with this record. Not every song, but kind of a repeating theme through it. And that's why I named it the average album.
Now, are you a big fan of vinyl? Is that why you're re-releasing it on vinyl limited edition? Or because I always wonder, because vinyls, I mean, when we were younger, vinyl was everywhere. And I always say, I used to go to this record store again. I still remember I saw Def Leppard open for the Scorpions and Ted Nugent. And I rode my bike the next day, and I got Def Leppard's first album. I had it on my little banana bike, and I drove. They had traffic circles. My parents would have killed me if they knew. But albums were so important when we were younger, and probably because you had older brothers and older sisters, albums were there. But is that why'd you decide to bring it out on vinyl? Does vinyl have a special place in your heart, or is it just something you thought would be cool and your fans would appreciate it?
I think kind of more of that. I think that there was a lot of people when I released the record. There was a lot of requests because I think there's a re-interest in vinyl. So, hey, are you going to do a vinyl release? Are you going to do a vinyl release? I got a lot of interest in that. So, and then when I had this book with Rare Bird was just going to be the book, and then I talked about, well, gee, I kind of have this record that I'm on now, and it's probably going to come out very soon. So then we decided to do kind of a sort of a simultaneous release with the book and the record. And Rare Bird is doing more. They do a lot of audio books, and they do audio things. And they thought it would be a good idea to do this limited edition vinyl release. And so there's they're getting in. Obviously, they do that as well at Rare Bird. They're kind of a lot of cool old school type of things that they're into. So it just seemed like, yeah, there was people that wanted to hear some vinyl, and I thought, why not? We'll kind of do a simultaneous release.
Now, the book, how did the book come about? Because I swear to God, when you go into your website, chrismullerspublishing.com, there's like, if you just click on art, there's like a drop down. Like there's tons of pictures, and this book is 277 pages or around that. It's not like it's a little book. I mean, so what? Did they approach you, or is this something that was on your bucket list that you said, because I want to put my pictures, my paintings all together? How did it come about?
Well, it was being laid out by a guy named Russell Joslin, and he is Skeleton Key Press is his company, and he's in Norway right now, living in Norway. And so he used to live in Minneapolis, so we met, and he was doing the layout in a potential kind of a release. He started to lay the book out. And so we kind of had the layout ready to go. And but then we didn't, the means to put it out. I was unsure of how I wanted to put it out, with whom. And then through another friend, Tom Hazelmeyer, who is of AMREP fame, among other things, and also an artist.
He's in the in your short flick. He plays the
yes,
the talking guy, the blah, 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 blah guy.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. No. So he's an artist also in Minnesota here, and a friend. And he mentioned Tyson, who we've become friends with at Rare Bird, and we connected up. We met and hit it off, and we're on the same page, and really liked the vibe and the feel of Rare Bird and the kind of things that they do. And it was just a real fun meeting, fun to meet him, and it just seemed like a good way to have the book put out. So it's been great. And they call them the F and G's. It's basically kind of like the all of the loose pages of the book to get sort of approved for the actual book itself. We're supposed to come today, but they're going to be coming tomorrow. So I'm super jazzed about being able to see how it's printed up, and then if there's any changes, we can do it. But I got a feeling it's going to be, their Rare Bird and Tyson's attention to detail is very high. So I think it's going to be good right off the bat. So very excited to see it tomorrow. It's coming.
Now, how did you decide on the chapters? Because you have Memories of Home, you have Chapter 31, you have the one that deals with, catastrophes. How do you put that together? Because, your art, first, I want you to tell my listeners a story. You wrote something great about monsters and then your brother and schizophrenia, and that's why you got in. Explain why you started painting the way you do, because how would you describe what your painting is? Is there a certain how there was such and such painted this or water lilies or abstract? How would you explain your paintings?
I would say that they are surrealism mixed with expressionism. So it's kind of combining the surreal and the expressionist. So much of what I paint, I was very influenced by my brother and growing up with him and watching him have to go off from time to time to an institution. He was institutionalized on and off. Just being aware of outcasts in society and being very intimate and knowing my brother on a level that, people that maybe aren't familiar with mental illness in the different forms, they may not know because they don't have firsthand experience, but I did have this firsthand experience from a very early age. And so then what you realize is that even though people have an illness, they're still people. They're still very dynamic. There's a lot of aspects to any human. And he was so much more than his illness. And so I think that's what I'm trying to say visually, is that will see my work and you might think this or that or whatever you might think. And I get all kinds of different, feedback from them. But if there's anything that anybody is wrestling with when they look at my work firsthand, that's kind of sort of an analogous to how someone might regard someone else initially and on the surface level. But then when you look deeper into what I'm trying to say, or if you look deeper into what a person is, you realize there's a lot more than what's happening on the surface. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with my work. It has a visual language that is apparent, but then when you investigate it a little bit more, you kind of get what I'm about and where it comes from. Then there's a beauty in the whatever chaos there might be or whatever sort of disharmony. There's a lot of harmony going on.
How do you think you've grown as a painter? Because I know in your website you had pastels earlier. Do you paint with oil now? What do you paint with now?
Yeah, I think when I discovered oil, I didn't want to do anything else. I went back to drawing and I did some scratch boards, and that's a good thing to kind of do from time to time because it's a skill that you should maintain. But the way I paint, it is kind of a combination of smearing paint, but also there's a lot of fine details. So there's a lot of drawing in it as well. So it's the medium is a great mix of being able to block something out in oil, and then also to get in there, with certain brushes and to just pull things out of that. So I think I answered that. Did I answer that?
Yeah, you did. And I want to know, though, what do you, I'm trying to word this right. The creative process of when you paint and when you do music, do you come at it the same way? Like your paintings, you have a ton of them. I mean, that's like, you have a ton. Even your book has a ton of them. But do they just, like I said about jokes, just popped in my head? Does a painting just pop in your head, like the general idea, and then you just, boom, you hit the canvas, and because I know on Instagram you have like some stops when you started and stuff like that. I mean, what's the difference between your painting and when you write music? Do you use the same process, or is it completely different?
It's different. It's different, and I think process is the word we're going to focus on here, because in the process of music, and if I'm doing it on my own, there are technical things that you got to keep in mind, because you're juggling all these things and sounds and whatever EQs, but then you're trying to write, the song also, and trying to, put something out that hopefully is, a decent song. But that part of it, and the melodies and the different aspects, creative aspects of music, I have to wait to come to me a little bit more. Like John Williams, I was just listening to an interview with the composer John Williams, who just scores great. Obviously, everybody knows, but he was saying that they were asking him, does it when you see the movie, does the music just come? Are you getting the ideas while you're watching? He said no, mostly not. He just sees the movie, then he goes home and he starts playing on the piano. But he said when he knows he has something is when a melody surfaces while he's playing, and it sounds like that melody's been there the whole time. So that's kind of how music is. I have to kind of wait for it to come, and then when I recognize that, okay, there's something there, then it feels like it's kind of always been there, and I plucked it from somewhere. Now with painting, it's much more, probably like you said, there's so much of it that I've done so far and continue to do, but it pulls me more than I have to wait for it. It's just like it's just sucking me in, and the ideas come very spontaneously and very fast, and the medium allows me to just dive in. And so every painting that I do, I might have a preconceived notion when I sit down, but that notion usually just goes away once I start painting, because it takes on a life of its own, and it's a conversation that I'm having with the surface and the paint, and one thing leads to another, and ideas start to happen spontaneously, and a lot of times too fast for me to keep up with. So it's a completely different way. It comes way more natural than music. Music, I have to wait for something, and I can sit down and try to force something music, and nothing will ever happen. And then with art, it's just every time I sit down, I can just go. So it's just
Now you do exhibitions. You do the paint things. And I always wonder how people go about that. You see someone's at a gallery. Do you think has it helped because you were in a band that you have a name? Does that make it easier for you, or people go, oh, he's just some musician who wants to paint? What is because you the guy from Def Leppard paints, Paul Stanley paints, and a lot of people paint. Yeah. But what has your experience been in that? Do people sit there? Because also you guys weren't a huge commercial band, so they probably embrace it. Like, oh, we can see he paints. But has that helped you get exhibitions, and does that help drive your price up? Because I think it would if you're going to sell a painting. People are like, hey, we got this from him.
Well, it's kind of interesting because the pop surrealism movement and the lowbrow movement in art that's out there, the early Juxtapose magazine, they've kind of changed quite a bit from what they started out to be. But there were these magazines and painters, and of my age, and a lot of them came from the punk scene. And I think that a lot of the visual language and the sound and the attitude all started to come together simultaneously, kind of in that 80s to 90s period. There was a lot of stuff that I started to see. In other words, like I remember having visions and having things, and maybe it's because the stimulus in the world is all stimulating everybody at the same time. And so these ideas, kind of come simultaneously to a lot of people. But I remember having a vision in my head that I wanted to get out, in the early 80s when I was just beginning music, or the musical career that I had. But painters that I would see like Mark Ryden or Sue Coe, and I never saw anything like their work before. But they weren't in bands. They were just painters. They were artists. They were expressing. But I also had that same vision in a way, like so whatever was stimulating everybody kind of comes together. So I think, does it help that I was in a band? We were never really hugely famous. I think we're a lot more famous now than we were when we were together. But I do think it was more of a group of people that were reacting to a lot of the art that was going on at that time. And so when I started painting and I started figuring out paint, I think it was very kind of there was a lot of the visual language was already there, and I think I was doing it decently, and I think that people responded to the art itself. And so to this day now, where I'll put things out to the public, like you said, like process paintings that I'm doing, to this day there's people that don't ever know that I was in a band. The two worlds don't meet. It's a kind of a funny thing. I thought in my head, like you said, there's a lot of musicians that paint and vice versa, and so you think artistically and creatively it just all goes together and everybody observes. That's how I was. But then I realized now that there are art enthusiasts, there's painting enthusiasts and visual enthusiasts that don't care about music, and then there's people that are just way down the music rabbit hole that could care less about anything visual. So there are some crossover things, but what I've found is that they're kind of separate worlds.
Now, looking back at your career, and I always like to ask this question because you've had a great career. You've done so many different things. When you look back, what are a few things that make you really proud? I mean, you have to be proud. I know as artists, we don't want to be proud. I always say artists, we're narcissistic and insecure. Like we want the limelight, then we bring. But what when you look back, what can you say a few things that you're proud of? Like you can sit there and go, man, you know what? I'm fucking proud of this.
I'm proud of the fact, and I think probably I can attribute this to my dad. And my dad took a lot of pride in his work. He was a hard worker. He had a work ethic about him, and so did my mom, and I think as examples, I adopted that. And I thought, well, whatever I do, I'm going to work really hard at it. And I think with the Replacements, we worked hard. There was a lot of work. There was a lot of crap that we dealt with. There was a lot of years that we were just sleeping on people's floors and touring around, all of us in one van with the equipment. I mean, but we didn't care because we had a work ethic about us. And I think also when that ended and I dove into other forms of art and now, painting, I think what I'm sort of most proud of is that I'm not afraid to work, and I'm glad that I applied myself and worked as hard as I could. So I think that's what I think about, because I think that's most of it. I think for what are they saying? 90% perspiration and 10% inspiration. I mean, I think there's a lot to that.
Well, what do you want your legacy to be?
Boy, whatever people want to make of it. I don't know. I just, I did, and I am proud that, in retrospect, as a band, we did something, and we came together. It was a storm. Something came out of that storm, and that's lasting. And I think that's another maybe aspect of it. Because I'll see stuff that I'll hear things or see things that don't hold up so well in time, and it could be a movie, a painting, a song, and over time it just doesn't stand the test. And then there's other things that are timeless. So I hope if there's any timelessness at all to what I do, I think that'd be kind of a nice thing if it can transcend time.
Well, this has been great, Chris. I'm really glad you came on. Now, when the book comes out, are you gonna do some go to some bookstores or anything, or are you going to?
Yeah, I think I am. Kind of whatever they line up. I have an exhibition that I'm excited about that will be in France coming up, and it will be God, where is it? I'd like to kind of plug it. It's going to be, oh my God, now I'm all, of course. It's going to be at the Mamier Museum in France. And it'll be opening on October 11th, through the 21st of December. So it's going to run for a long time, and it's at a beautiful old, building that was built by Louis the 13th or 14th? I can't remember. Louis the 14th. I got it right. Okay. So this beautiful building, and it's going to be, other artists, internationally, different artists. I'm the one from the United States that will be showing, and it's done through Hey Magazine. So I'm just plugging that.
I got a really stupid question about that, Okay, so when you go do one of those openings, one, how many paintings do you take? Two, do you have to fly them over? I'm sure you don't put them in. How do you get them over there? And then do you go over, or how does it work?
I have gone over, but I probably won't go on this one. But basically, I'm asked to participate, and then I know what the theme of the show is. Kind of harmony, or the middle ground, which is, again, there's that theme again. That's what the record is, and I had no idea that this was going to be the theme of the show. But so it was perfect, because I did a series, and it's a portraiture show. So I'll have 6 portraits in it, along with the other artists that are going to be participating. But they tell me what the theme is and what they'd like to see. And it's kind of a loose thing, but, I sort of try to wrap my head around it, and then just go and do, and, within sort of loose guidelines. And then hopefully I do something good. But they seem excited about the work I've produced. And so I'm excited to send, and then I'll just basically pack them up and ship them over to France, and they will present it, and they're great. Anne of Hey Magazine has just been wonderful to work with. So
I have one more question.
Yes.
Because I forgot to ask and I wrote it down. I want to hear about Mutt Mutt Engine.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah, I got to talk about Mutt Mutt Engine. Yeah, so that is a rescue. Then we've I think in about 5 years we've helped place 2,200 dogs. And what we do, because we get so attached to dogs, we have 6 of them. So we used to foster, but we can't anymore, because especially me, I get attached, and if it's more than 2 weeks, I want to keep it. So danger. So basically what we do, we're an engineering type of Mutt engineering, and we facilitate dogs that are in trouble anywhere we can find them, and a lot of them come from Tijuana. So there's a lot of Mexican dogs, but also parts of the U.S., where dogs are in trouble. They're on the street. A lot of times they're really rough cases. We will get them. We'll have people that we work with around the country and in Mexico get the dogs, get them vetted, get them ready to travel and then we coordinate the transportation, and then the transportation takes them to various fosters around the country, and then they find themselves in the homes. So eventually, and then we track it on the website as well. So Mutt Mutt Engine will see sign on where they start out, where they're going, and we like to kind of get updates so people can follow that. It's really fun, and we've seen some really tough cases from the street turn around and find themselves in really happy homes. So it's been really fun to watch that happen. So
well, that's awesome. People go to Chris's website, chrismarspublishing.com. Go to my website, coopertalk.net. You can find over 1,015 episodes on there. You can email me at coopertalk.net. If you're in the Philadelphia area, August 22nd, I host my monthly speakeasy stand-up at the Soundplex Studios. This is the coolest place in South Jersey. 3 levels, has a recording studio. I always put a great lineup. It's BYOB. And there's wine tasting, so do that. Follow me on Twitter. It's at Cooper Talk. And remember, I'm Steve Cooper. I'm only as hip as my guests. Don't forget, drink your water, eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, and I'll talk to you next time.